Now back to Just Energy Radio with Dr. Rita Louise.
Welcome back to Just Energy Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you all for staying tuned to the second hour of the show. Don't forget, Just Energy Radio is brought to you by SoulHealer.com and the Institute of Applied Energetics. That's www.appliedenergeticsinstitute.com. And please do check out the Just Energy Radio website. That's www.justenergyradio.com, and sign up for our weekly newsletter so you can keep informed of the guests we have coming up on the show. But we're still here talking to John Michael Greer. His book is Apocalypse Now, and his website is www.archdruidreport.blogspot.com. I know that's a mouthful, but it's www.thearchdruidreport.blogspot.com. Hi, John.
Hello there.
I think a lot of people, when they think of the end of the world, I mean, not just the 2012 thing, but the end of the world in general, they have visions of, you know, the Antichrist and 666 and that whole thing where on their forehead. Where did that whole thing come from in the first place?
Most of it comes pretty directly from the Book of Revelations or a couple of other passages in the New Testament. And, I mean, more broadly, there's a whole series of traditions that sort of flowed into creating the Christian apocalyptic tradition that we've got, the Antichrist as the ultimate bad guy of all time, and the mark of the beast and all that. The Book of Revelations is a very complex piece of writing. It's very richly symbolic. It has all kinds of very complex numerical codes woven through it, and a lot of other really intricate work, which is all the more embarrassing that you get people like Tim LaHaye et al. Who are taking it in this sort of maniacally literal sense, you know, all of these things, all of these brilliant pieces of impressive symbolism. No, it's not a symbolism. It's going to literally happen. We're going to have, you know, these monsters show up on schedule and stars drop onto the earth and people. Well, you can't say people vanishing because the rapture isn't in the Book of Revelation. It was invented in the 19th century. But yeah, it's what happens when you take a very richly symbolic, esoteric, spiritual writing and interpret it in a kind of mindlessly literal fashion.
But it would be kind of cool if there were, like, angels flying around everywhere and, you know, on clouds, and people are going to go, that's not a UFO, that's an angel. Right.
Well, of course, that's the whole promise behind the sort of pop evangelicalism that we've had over the last 30 years or so in America, where, you know, all of these symbolic things that people aren't really comfortable dealing with as symbols anymore. No, they're physical realities, and they're going to actually show up. And then everyone will have to admit that we're right and they're wrong.
Except they'll be dead, so it doesn't really matter.
Well, but not immediately. I mean, it takes a while for the Antichrist to slaughter everybody, okay? So as they die in misery and terror, they'll know that they were wrong and the Christians were right.
Actually, the whole concept of the rapture fascinates me.
It's amazing.
I mean, I actually received a copy of that Left Behind movie as a Christmas gift, which I thought was like a really cheesy movie, so I didn't finish watching it because I thought it was just really cheesy. And the person that gave it to me was like, well, did you watch the movie? And I'm like, does it have significance? I mean, you know, I thought it was like a $5 bargain basement movie. And so then I had to watch it again, and I will just never forget the part where, you know, the people are disappearing off the airplanes and disappearing, driving their cars, and they're disappearing, and then there are all the suckers that are left behind, and I'm like going, wait a minute, what if I'm one of those suckers that are left behind? Then I'd have to walk around and go, hey, I'm a sucker, you know.
which is, again, the whole point of it. No, the thing is, the rapture isn't in the Bible. You can read it in there if you work overtime. If you really, really work hard to kind of pile one passage on top of another that isn't connected to it. But the entire idea was invented by a guy named John Nelson Darby, who was a Protestant minister in the middle years of the 19th century. He was Irish, and he was reacting to one of the most colorful events in recent apocalyptic history, which was the Millerite movement that finally crashed and burned in October 1844. That's one of the things I talk about in my book. The Millerites were kind of the Y2K of the 2012. Again, of the 19th century. You had this big movement of people who were completely convinced that the world was going to end on October 22nd, 1844.
Hey, that's like that guy recently. Wasn't he the same date?
Well, October. That's true. Yeah. Well, it's one of the two Herald camping dates. He had another one in May. But yeah, and literally in all over America, people were climbing onto hilltops. Literally thousands, hundreds of thousands of people standing on hilltops all over America, because they wanted to get a really good view when Jesus appeared in glory in the clouds. And then it didn't happen. And the thing is, William Miller, the guy who came up with all this stuff, who was a hardscrabble Yankee farmer, by the way, and who for apocalyptic prophecy was kind of his hobby, and he had this absolutely airtight set of arguments that were completely unanswerable in terms of the popular Protestant Christianity of his time, which is why one of the many reasons why his ideas became so widely spread, so popular, was just it was evangelical Protestant Christianity taken to its logical conclusion. And then Jesus pulled a no-show. And so an awful lot, so first of all, of course, hundreds of thousands of people sort of stumbled their way down from the hilltops to face the raucous laughter of their neighbors who had been saying all along, "Are you out of your gourd?" And an awful lot of what had been standard interpretation of the Book of Revelation, standard end times theory, got very quietly dropped into the round file because nobody wanted to be reminded too precisely of what a bunch of fools they'd made of themselves. That's when John Nelson Darby entered the picture, because he had come up with a new way to interpret the Book of Revelation. Because Miller and for hundreds of years before William Miller's time, there had been this idea that all of these symbolic things in the Book of Revelations represented historical events between the time of Christ, or between the end of the Acts of the Apostles, basically, and the end of the world. And so there was all of this arguments, all these back and forth things about, well, what did this plague stand for? And what did this seal, these 7 seals that are to be opened, what do they stand for? What do they represent in history? Which one of these is the Holy Roman Empire? Which one of these is Napoleon, and so on? That was a very popular thing in end times theory back in those days. And so what Darby came up with was the idea, no, that doesn't count. There's this thing that somehow didn't get mentioned in the Bible called the Great Parenthesis. Okay, and the Great Parenthesis is it comes between the end of the age of the apostles, if you will, and the beginning of the end times. And none of it got mentioned in the Bible somehow. Nobody, for whatever reason, nobody got around to referencing it. So there's no way to time when the switch gets thrown and the beginning of the book of Revelations, the beginning of the end times, starts up. And so this allowed people to ditch all of these attempts to figure out how to make the Book of Revelations work in history, and allowed people like Tim LaHaye to say, no, it's all absolutely literal. We're going to have these monstrous creatures with scorpions' tails and angels dropping rocks on the world and all this kind of stuff. It's all literal. But that was all Darby's thing, and Darby also had this idea that because there are a couple of verses that allow you to work your way around to claiming somehow that there's going to be something like a rapture. But he's the one who came up with the idea that suddenly, at some moment, right about the time the end times actually kick off, every real Christian in the world is going to be beamed up, as though they're being beamed up to the USS Enter Christ by St. Scotty. And really, I think that Star Trek has had a huge role in the development of rapture theology, because everyone, so many people in the generations that have really bought into the rapture thing They grew up watching Star Trek, and they all do, and you appear on in the transporter room. So they're expecting to be beamed up in a heavily transporter room.
But then you have to stop. I mean, where I always look at it is, okay, so there are the belief-based spirituality people, and then there are the experience-based, or the ones that believe in God and try to live a moral and just life like Moses and Noah, those people that we kind of look to in the Bible. And it's like, okay, so who's really going to get beamed up?
Well, there's that. Part of the...
I guess I shouldn't say that out loud, huh?
No, you should say that out loud. There was a running joke in my high school, and that was that the rapture was going to come any day now, and all 6 of the real Christians in the world were going to find themselves in heaven.
Eating tuna?
Entirely possibly. Well, it's the eon of the fish. Hey.
No, that was this other joke about Mother Teresa and God making her tuna sandwiches, and he was like, well, I don't really like cooking for 2.
Funny. Yeah. But so this, the rapture was really a fringe belief until the beginning of the 20th century, when we had the first great surge of fundamentalism in the United States, and more generally. And it crashed and burned in the late 1920s and 1930s. And then it went back to being a fringe belief until the 1970s, when a lot of the Jesus freaks and so on, people running away from the unsolved questions of the 60s, bailed into evangelical Christianity, and out came the rapture again. And I think we will probably see within the next decade or so that whole thing sort of fall apart of its own momentum again, and go through another few decades where the rapture is on the fringes, and they'll be back, I'm sure. It's very appealing if you don't actually have any hope for the future. If you convince yourself you don't have anything to look forward to, there's nothing you can do about your life, you're just going to be circling in this rut, fantasizing about the rapture has got to be very, very comforting.
I guess if you think that you're good enough to be one of the ones that are saved, there's only so much room.
How many bumper stickers have you seen saying, in case of rapture, this vehicle will not be occupied?
Actually, I don't know that I've ever seen that.
You have,
it.
Hey, maybe the people in Texas are a little less arrogant than the ones in Seattle. I used to see that in Seattle all the time.
No, they're a lot. I used to live in Seattle. They're a lot more open and vocal about their beliefs.
That may be it then. But yeah, there was a book by a Christian comedian some years ago titled "He's Gonna Toot and I'm Gonna Scoot." I don't know what it is about a certain class of I don't know, it's humorist or apocalypticists, but they don't think about what their book actually sounds like to anybody but themselves. Somebody says that, and I think flatulence. I don't think the end of the world.
Well, yeah, you said that, and my dog scoots her butt all over the floor, and that was the image that came to my mind, and I'm like, got to do with poo.
Well, there we go. It's like there was actually somebody denouncing a fundamentalist online. I don't know if the website is up anymore, but it was titled "Exposing Satan's Left Behind." He meant to mean that the Left Behind series was satanic, and he was exposing. But who would want to expose any side of the devil's, any part of the devil's backside?
It could be hot. I don't know. Oh, it's the devil. It is hot.
There you go. I'd rather keep the devil's rump covered, frankly. There are things I don't need to see. But there has been, unfortunately, a lot of that sort of unintentional humor in this whole business.
Well, and one of the things that I always wonder too, it's like, okay, so if this is a Christian-based thing, which obviously I'm not going to be part of, is it going to be the Baptists? And if it's going to be the Baptists, which group of the Baptists? Or is it going to be the Episcopalians? Like, who is actually the group? Because, one Jesus is better than the other Jesus, and, they rapture better, and... You know what I mean? And so it's just gonna be like this one church, only some of those people and nobody else. Or I don't understand that.
Funny. They rapture better. That's nice. Yeah, it's very reminiscent in a way. There was an outfit, actually a Texas-based outfit. There again, I don't know if they're still around, called the Church of the Subgenius, who were kind of satirical, although you never could figure out whether they were deliberately funny or serious trying to be funny, or funny trying to be serious, or what. They had this weird sarcastic theology, but one of the things that they had in the end times was the plague of false Jesus. Jesus being the plural of Jesus, of course. So there was going to be this plague of false Jesus who were showing up, including the football player Jesus and the 800-foot-tall Jesus that Oral Roberts used to talk to, and the vampire Jesus who gave his blood for you and wants it back, and all this kind of stuff. In a way, we've got that. We've got all of these people claiming that they've got Jesus. Like they have a gun to his head and say, if you ever want to see him again, pay your tithes. But they've got their Jesus, and he somehow seems to be different from everybody else's Jesus. And who's actually going to get raptured?
I don't know.
It's a complicated business, and it doesn't make any kind of reasonable sense. And because it's very clearly an attempt to deal with the conflict between a particular way of interpreting Christianity on the one hand and the way that the world actually works on the other, it's a mess.
I mean, one of the other things about the Book of Revelation that I like is the whole number of the beast thing. And my sister-in-law made this comment to me, and it really kind of stuck with me. If we're going to really put the whole, apocalyptic thing in this time period, is the concept of doing the implants. So they can put your medical records in there. Nudge, nudge. Yeah, that.
It was supposed to be barcodes when I was in high school. Barcodes were the number of the beast, and everyone was going to have a barcode printed on their forehead.
But see, barcodes are a little hard to do, but this chip thing is something that they're looking at really instituting, and people have been chipped, and we chip our pets.
Well, some people chip their pets.
Okay, some people. I mean, I have not chipped my pet.
There we go.
But it's something that I could see actually becoming a reality, and then I think, well, then who would the Antichrist be? The government? That's a behemoth.
Well, of course, that's usually the argument that's made, which is why you tend to get a lot of this in the sort of far right circles that are daydreaming about 1861. The thing is, the number of the beast, the number 666, okay, is the solar number. If you know your old numerical, your numerical Kabbalah, your numerical symbolism from ancient times, 666 is the sum of all the numbers in the magical square of the sun, which is a piece of classic astrological symbolism. It's the solar number, and so it's the number of the ego. It's the number of centralized power of every kind. And so the thing is, the Book of Revelations actually makes a huge amount of sense if you recognize that it's symbolism and that it's not supposed to be interpreted in some kind of maniacally simple-minded Tim LaHaye literalism. Any centering of power, any centralization of power has that solar element to it, and it has the risk of becoming that Antichrist thing when it's out of balance. Christians that I've talked to who are, I think, perhaps more than usually sensible about this sort of thing, argue that what's called the Antichrist is an eternal spiritual possibility. It's something that is always present, it's always there in any of us, and it has to do with setting the ego up on any level, the level of personality, the level of a government, the level of what have you, as something opposed to the rest of the cosmos, as something that doesn't have to be subject to the greater balance of the whole. That's where 666 ends up. And what the author of Revelations is saying to us there is that when things spin out of control in that way, when governments become oppressive and tyrannical, when our egos become oppressive and tyrannical, when any part of our life comes to dominate everything else, that's the solar energy running out of control. That's that centralizing, power-based approach to consciousness. When it's in balance, it has its place, because you know how a lot of those numbers, it's a matter of you add up certain things and it equals that number?
Mm-hmm.
Okay? The words Lord Jesus Christ also add up to 666. In Greek.
This is the Antichrist.
Well, just as Messiah, and in Hebrew, the word Messiah and the word Nachash, serpent, the serpent of the book of Genesis, have the same number. They add up to the same number. The point is that nothing in the cosmos can be understood in a simplistic, simple-minded way. Everything has its positive potential and its negative potential. And so, well, for example, in Greek, the name Babylon, the city, the evil city in the book of Revelations, and the words for the holy city Jerusalem also add up to the same number. So the archetype of the city can express itself either in the form of the New Jerusalem, in the form of a community in perfect balance, or it can express itself in the form of a community in total imbalance, a dictatorial society where everything is subservient to one person's ego.
But like anything in the universe, it just is, and then from that it can go positive or negative or be imbalanced. Yeah,
here is this principle. It's a principle that exists in the universe. Now, how do we relate to it? That determines how it affects us. How do we build this principle into our lives? What do we balance it with? And, at that point you start getting into the deep places of the book of Revelation and every other part of the Bible. It irritates the stuffing out of me sometimes to see the number of people both on the true believer end and on the fist-pounding atheist end who insist on reading that incredibly rich, incredibly complex, incredibly symbolic document as though it could only be understood in the most idiotically literal fashion.
But it does make for a good horror movie.
The Book of Revelations, taken literally, is. I suppose I have not seen any of the Left Behind.
I only saw the very first one because,
I had better things to do with my time, like cleaning my teeth, I think.
Well, actually, no. There was one on TV recently, and we watched it just because you can laugh at it pretty much. And it does have little snippets of kind of interesting, thought-provoking
that's good.
Stuff.
I'm delighted to hear that. I actually haven't had a television in my house in my adult life, and that's my particular prejudice. I find it incredibly dull. But so I'll pass.
Okay, you can.
Thank you.
Let me ask you this. Are most of the end of the world, or do we find end of the world prophecies mostly associated with religious traditions, or do we find them, other than the Y2K thing, which was kind of a computer thing, but I guess that would fall in that category, but how do they kind of fall out that way?
Well, back in the day when most human thought was structured by religion, of course, all apocalyptic prophecies were religious. Once you started getting a building secular end of society, starting in maybe the 17th century, you started getting secular apocalypses. I mentioned Marxism a little while ago. It's an absolutely classic example. The Marxist idea basically takes the entire worldview of Christian apocalypticism and tries to map it into economics. So you've got, in place of Eden, you have primitive communism. In place of the fall, you have the discovery of private property. In the various dispensations between then and the birth of Christ become, tribalism and feudalism and early capitalism and so on. In place of Jesus, you have Karl Marx. In instead of the apostles, you have the First International. In place of the Second Coming, you have, well, Lenin, basically, or whoever the great revolutionary hero is supposed to be. You then have the struggle between the forces of good and evil. You have the 1,000-year millennium of socialism, followed by the descent of the New Jerusalem of communism from the heavens, and then we will all eat strawberries and cream. It's literally Christian theology rewritten in the language of bad economics, and it was an immensely religious movement that claimed to despise all of religion. And you get this kind of thing all the time. There were a lot of people in the 19th century, a lot of people in the 20th century, who were taking these very religious apocalyptic things, but rewriting them in secular terms, so that you could claim, well, it's like Ray Kurzweil these days. I don't know if you've seen his stuff on the singularity. Does that ring any bells?
Kind of, not really. So.
Okay. Kurzweil is a computer scientist, and he is convinced that by the year 2045, that's the latest date that he's set, computer science will have advanced to the point that we will be able to create intelligent supercomputers that are smarter than human beings. And since these intelligent supercomputers will then be able to design new computers that are even smarter than they are, and so on, you'll have this exponential curve resulting in infinitely intelligent supercomputers who can literally suspend the laws of nature and give us everything we've ever dreamed about, unless they decide to wipe us out first.
Or put it in the Matrix.
Yeah, he goes on and on and on about these various, how after this happens, after the singularity happens, we'll all have our personalities uploaded into robot bodies and go zooming off to an eternity of bliss in space. It's the rapture, okay? In place of the second coming of Jesus, you have the arrival of the infinitely intelligent supercomputers. In place of the glorified bodies of the elect, you have these robot bodies that we're all going to upload our personalities into. In place of heaven, out of space, eternal life, you've got it. Basically, Kurzweil is the Harold Camping of the computer geek set, and yet an enormous number of people take him seriously and miss the intensely religious, indeed intensely fundamentalist religious dimension of this belief system of his, because they don't think of it as religion. They can't. There isn't a God in it. There isn't an obvious God in it anywhere, so it can't be religious. Therefore, we're going to take this, frankly, delusional set of notions seriously.
But I guess what people don't realize is that religion is about beliefs. And so anything that you believe could be a religion.
Well, it's also any belief around which you focus your ideas of ultimate meaning. Okay? Your religion is the thing that defines what really matters in the world. If what really matters in the world to you is the infinite progress of science, let's say, and there's a lot of people for whom that's true. The idea that science and technology will progress infinitely upward into the future, will all, humanity will end up conquering the stars, blah, blah, blah. That's a religious belief. It's a very popular religious belief, or it was until recently. And there are people who feel just as passionately about that as any Christian feels about the beliefs of his or her faith. And yeah, so the fact that it doesn't have an obvious God. Now, actually, of course, Kurzweil's belief does have a God, or gods rather. It's these infinitely intelligent supercomputers. That's his God. He simply thinks that he can build God.
Okay.
It doesn't make any sense to me either. But then, there's a lot of these. There's a lot of people out there. There's a lot of people in the more religious end of the UFO scene who are convinced that they're in communication with the Space Brothers, and the Space Brothers have told them that at on December 21st, 2012, they're going to beam up the sufficiently spiritually awakened people onto flying saucers while the Earth is destroyed by a giant comet. It's the rapture again. It's just in this case the angels are graves from Zeta Reticuli.
But see, some of that stuff makes me laugh because the UFO community doesn't like psychic people, but if they're talking to these space beings, then they obviously are channeling information from somewhere But channeling is a psychic thing,
it's a psychic thing, but no, it's the same.
But it's
reason.
okay if you're channeling alien people. But if you're channeling, I don't know, Fred.
Well, it's the same.
You know, it's not any good.
The great alien ascended master, Fred. Come on. Fred the dolphin from Zeta Reticuli. Yeah. It's the same reason why a lot of Christian groups don't like psychics. Because the psychics might say something different than the official line. But
if you channel Mother Mary, it's okay.
Tell that to your local Catholics. They do not want to
talk
about that.
I'm serious. I'm serious.
You're serious? People channel?
I was doing my internship for my naturopath degree, and this client came in, and she was all excited because she was going to Washington, D.C. to go listen to this woman talk because she communicated with Mary. And I had to just zip my lip, because I'm like, okay, now can't do psychic stuff, But she can go hear this woman go communicate with Mary, and that was perfectly okay in Christianity.
Now that's fascinating, because in a lot of Christian settings, that's called heresy, and back when the church still had power, it would get you burned at the stake.
No, thousands of people were supposed to show up to this thing.
Well, there you go. That's interesting. I had not encountered that.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty interesting myself.
Yeah, you can channel, but you have to channel the right aliens.
Yeah, that's it.
Maybe the thing is, you do get some very funny things going on in some parts of the UFO community where they the people who are convinced they're talking with the alien space commander Sananda, who was Jesus, by the way, according to their belief system. And Sananda's been around for a long time. I'm pretty convinced that there is actually some kind of being there, because he always says the same things, and he always predicts the same things, and they're always wrong. Well, but one of the most famous examples, and it deserves discussion in any any end of the world conversation. There was the group in Chicago that in 1954, I think it was, proclaimed that vast waves would sweep across North America from the Arctic Ocean on December 21st, 1954. And they would have just been any ordinary apocalyptic UFO sect, except for the fact that the local university heard about it and snuck some grad students in under false pretenses to take details. The result was a book called When Prophecy Fails, which is one of the classics of American sociology. And it's a book that I wish more people who are convinced of the rightness of their beliefs would read, because it's a very nice analysis of what happens when somebody who's made an apocalyptic prediction has to come to terms with the fact that they were dead wrong. Because of course the floods did not come, and the flying saucers did not pick up the assembled true believers and waft them away to safety in orbit, or anything like that. But the same things have been being predicted over and over again. And Sananda, by the way, was the entity that Dorothy Martin, the woman in the channeler in the study, Sananda was the one that she was talking to. And that those claims have been made over and over again. We're still waiting for the spaceships to land. We're still waiting for the disclosure to take place. We're still waiting for the catastrophes or what have you.
Do you have a belief, in spiritual beings, and that spiritual beings do communicate with us? And I don't mean like aliens, although it's
no.
they don't live here. I guess you could call them an alien, but
you could call them. What I know. Remember, I'm with you. I'm not interested in belief. I'm interested in knowledge. What I know is that it is fairly easy for people to have the experience of communicating with a being that doesn't happen to have a body. What is on the other side of that experience, what is it that you're actually communicating with, is a devil of a question in several potential senses of the word. We don't know what they are. Can you have this experience? Yes. Have I had that experience? Of course. Anybody who practices certain kinds of esoteric spirituality is going to have the that unnerving experience where you realize that you are apparently in communication with another intelligent being who doesn't happen to have a body. Is it an archetype of the collective unconscious? Is it a dissociated portion of the psyche? Is it an actual spiritual being living in a continuum only accessible to the mind? How can you tell?
You can. It could be Fred the janitor that lives in Zeta Reticuli sending you a message.
It could be. Yeah, it could be Fred the alien janitor. They gotta have janitors sweep the corridors of their flying saucers, don't they?
That's right.
You don't know, but the experience happens. And so whatever is behind the experience, again, whether it's a psychological phenomenon, whether it's or what have you, lots of people have that experience, and very, very often, if it's handled in a sane and constructive and balanced manner, it seems to be a productive kind of experience to have. You can get good information that way. You can also get some really crazy information that way.
Oh, I've heard some really crazy stuff, and it's like, okay, whatever.
Yeah, I used to. It's gone downhill, and I'm almost disappointed by that fact. But when I was first publishing in the field of hermetic spirituality, I used to get some doozies in the mail. Letters from people who claimed they were doing battle with evil sorcerers in black watchtowers who were in communication with the spirit of Adolf Hitler who had been reincarnated in a comet which was going to hit the Earth in 1999. That's just one of the ones that I got.
Now, see, if we were doing like this video thing, you would get to see the look on my face, like, which obviously does not come across on radio.
No, unfortunately not. The moment of dead silence was pretty good, though.
Okay, good.
Still, it would make. You want a B movie, a really bad straight-to-video occult horror movie? Hard to beat. So it may be that what we're dealing with here is, disembodied scriptwriters from 1930s Hollywood who are kind of trying to send out their worst ideas that they're really excited by. I don't know.
I
think
know.
Tim LaHaye picked up one of those.
Some of it just makes me laugh. And
Good.
I'll say this. I mean, we don't. It's my show, so I can pick who I have, and it's like, and I don't bring on people that have channel material because my BS button goes off regardless of, whether I believe it. All right, or I can't say I never do. There have been a couple of people that I've had on because the material that they portray have in their book, I think is, I don't go, huh? But there's weird stuff.
I know a number of people who have regular conversations with apparent non-physical beings who are perfectly sane, sensible, well-adjusted, and don't froth at the mouth or spend their time doing battle with sorcerers and black watchtowers or things like that. On the other hand, these are not usually the people who are running around trying to get on talk shows. So maybe that's it. Maybe you should put a call out for, could I please hear from some sane channelers?
Well, I mean, one of the things is that I like watching the person actually channel because I can watch them bring the spirit in and see where they connect, how they connect, whether I feel like they have a real connection. I mean, I've seen people, channel, and I'm like, they aren't even doing anything. They're not even seeing a spirit around them, which is kind of okay, whatever.
Years ago, there was a friend of a friend who would do this fake channeling routine. It was just hilarious, and her bogus spirit was named Tofu. And so she'd jiggle kind of like soybean curd, which is, and do this sort of channeled voice, and it was really great because it actually did look very much like some of the then extremely popular channelers, and utter complete inanities in exactly the same tone.
But I had this one friend that we would work different events next to each other or whatever, and he was a full body channel, and he would call. He worked with two different people. The one that I liked better, which I forget his name off the top of my head, when he would bring him in, I don't know if he had a choice which one he brought in, but he would bring this one guy in, and his body would contort, and he would twist over to the side and kind of bend over like one shoulder was below the other and have this very strange posturing to his body. And then talk, but I would watch, and he would bring this guy down into his chest and below his, like down to his belly button area. I mean, really far in. And he would make the communication, and the impression I got was that it was this very old, arthritic man. And the spirit would leave him, and he would sit back up in the chair, and he would come back. And I would go, "Oh, you brought so-and-so," and he'd go, "How do you know?" It's like, I can tell because your body does this thing. And he goes, "It does what?" He didn't even know. I can
say he was apparently going fairly deep into trance.
Really kind of cool.
Well, there you go.
Anyway, that has anything to do with the end of the world. So let's get back to the end of the world because, we are running out of time. We only have a few months left.
Well, you know what? When nothing happened today, a.k.a. December 21st, 2012, has rolled by, and all of the various people who were insisting on that a giant comet was going to splat the Earth or whatever. I mean, there's a million different claims at this point for what's going to happen on December 21st, 2012, and when none of it has happened. And all of the people who insist on that are busy writing books to explain that either, well, yes, it did, but it happened in some kind of invisibly astral sense, or perhaps that, no, the date was off and it's actually going to be in 2013 or 2020 or what have you. Then we can have this conversation again.
Well, actually, December 21st is a Friday, so we will be on air, and it was suggested by Jim, my chat room host, that we do, like, what happened to you while the world was ending around you?
Oh, that would be fun.
And just kind of make it a call-in show.
Oh, sweet, yeah. And ask the aliens from Zeta Reticuli to call in also.
Oh, yeah. Well, I could arrange that.
Greetings, Earthlings.
You're too funny.
Isn't that difficult to make an alien?
It seems to me. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, it should be an interesting time. It depends, really, though, on how many. I mean, we're still early days yet to see how frantic it actually gets. I'm thinking about what happened when the Millerite movement peaked in October of 1844, and there were literally the mass media of the time. Newspapers were high tech in those days. The mass media of the time was full of stuff on the whole, the end of the world approaching and all this kind of stuff, and hundreds of thousands of people were deeply into it. I don't know whether we're going to get that this year or not. If we do,
I'm kind of not feeling like we will. I mean, I think the camping thing, a lot of people were like, well, I kind of don't believe them, but it could happen. And when that just nothing happened at all, and then, and the Y2K thing, I think people are going, whatever, like I did for the Y2K. It's like, well, I'll buy a couple of cans of beans and have a little water, and, if the world blows up, whatever.
Yeah, the thing is, it seems to vary from region to region. I've heard from people that I know out in some parts of the West Coast where they're seeing a lot of people who are deeply into it.
Really?
So we'll see what happens. Hey,
well, that ought to be interesting.
Texas may be immune.
Well, but we have guns in Texas, so, they feel safe.
I could see somebody out there with his 6 guns blasting away at a UFO. Or a comet.
But with all these predictions that have happened, over the millennia, wouldn't you think we would learn by now that maybe we shouldn't take them so seriously?
Well, you'd think. But have you noticed that every time somebody comes up and say, here's this hot new investment and it's going to keep on gaining in value forever, even though that's the same thing that has caused every boom and bust since tulip mania in 17th century Holland, people still pile into it. They got into tech stocks, they got into subprime real estate. Now there's a lot of people bailing into shale gas on the same basis. Certain things are just so emotionally appealing that people have a very hard time setting those emotions aside, saying, well, no, if it were that easy to get instantly rich, everyone would already have done it, and maybe this person is just trying to suck the money out of my bank account. Or in the case of the apocalypse, well, I remember that's been tried like every 3 or 4 years since about the year 1300 BC, and it's always turned into a complete flop, so maybe we should ignore the crazy man who's saying the world's about to end. But people don't do that because they get so deeply caught up in the contrast between the world they have, the life they have, and the world they fantasize about having. I'm thinking of a story that I was told by David Spangler, the spiritual teacher, very active in Findhorn for many years. In the run-up toward Y2K, he was approached by a woman after a lecture, and she was really upset about the whole Y2K business. And he was going, I can understand this, with banks shutting down, positive power failing, da-da-da-da. But no. She set him straight. That was not what bothered her. Her marriage was coming apart. She was in a dead-end job. Her life really just sucked, okay? The thing that terrified her was the prospect that on January 1st, 2000, she'd have to wake up and in the same world and go on with her life. That's what's
interesting? There's a lot of people that I've talked to that have the feeling, well, if it ends December 21st, that'd be okay.
And that's the sort of thing that drives this kind of thing, because it's the fantasy that someone else will change our lives for us. It's that fantasy.
I just want to know, so then I can go out and charge up my credit cards. Or not. In my presentation, I always kind of make that crack, and this woman goes, but then you'll have bad karma. And I'm like, yeah, but then my bad karma can run over my dogma. I don't know. I had so much fun with that lady who just kept getting on my case about, me
bad
and my
karma.
credit card.
Yeah, that's funny. Your bad karma, credit card karma, actually what will happen is you'll be born into your next incarnation with inherited debt.
Yeah.
Yeah. You just think you can get away with it.
Well, no, it's the implant. It follows you from lifetime to lifetime. John, I love you. You have just as weird a mind as mine.
Well, thank you. That's quite a compliment.
It is. So why do you think we do this to ourselves? Why do you think we go around and just try to scare the crap out of ourselves?
Because it's a very challenging thing to have to look at our lives and say, if this is going to get any better, I'm going to have to make it better. If this is going to change, I'm going to have to change it. Nobody's going to do it for me. That's terrifying. It's essential. It's the basis for true maturity. It's the basis for any honest spirituality. But it's scary, and so people will run away from that like rabbits, rather than buckle down and actually make the changes that they know they have to make to have the life that they could live.
Well, but I think at this point, there was a very different energy at the Y2K period of time. It was before 9/11. But the country was in a very prosperous period. It was a different emotional energy going on at that point in time. And now, there's just so much going on as far as the economics and jobs and housing that people just feel so powerless about. It's not just changing me. It's like, how do I change these things around me that I kind of don't have any control over?
No. You have to start by changing your own life. It was because we didn't make the changes we had to make during that period of prosperity that we ended up in the mess that we're in now. And it's only by making changes in our own lives, in our own families, and our own communities that we can start laying the foundation for something better in the years to come. Alternatively, we can just keep on pushing the responsibility off onto someone else, and it will just get worse. We were laughing about karma a little while ago, but the Hindu word karma just means action. It just means the consequences of your own actions and the consequences of sitting on your hands with your thumbs up someplace biologically uncomfortable and not taking action when you can.
But the kind of, I'm going to say, social, political changes that I think a lot of people believe need to happen require huge changes. And, well, let me just finish. And I think as a society we're too lazy, and one of the things I say is the only way that I think it could happen is that if we got the big 2x4 up the side of the head kind of thing.
Well, I think we're getting it, and I think that's exactly the point. The 2x4 doesn't necessarily land all at once, but the point is to recognize that that's what's happening, that the economic difficulties we're having, the political difficulties we're having, the social difficulties we're having are in fact the 2x4 that's telling us, look, the way you're living is not working. You must change your life. You were saying, quote, we're too lazy. That starts by expressing itself at the individual level. And if we can start changing our lives at the individual level, we can start using less, spending less, saving more, doing without the way all of our grandparents knew how to do, to build a better future for ourselves and our descendants. Then we can actually start turning things around and making things happen. As long as we insist on, I want it now, I don't care what the consequences are, we're going to have exactly the same experiences we're having, just worse.
Well, and it seems like young people, the new generation coming into adulthood, I mean, that's what they were raised on. So
that's what they're raised on. They have a very rough road to hoe. And I hope they can learn. And there's a lot of people who've been saying all along. There's a lot of people in that generation who are saying, look, this is not working. And I think eventually it's going to sink in. Again, that 2x4 lands a certain number of times, and eventually you notice it.
You think?
Go eventually. It can leave a lot of bruises before that sets in. But yeah.
Hitch in the head, then hitch in the head knocks you in the street, then the car comes and runs you over a few times. It's like,
yeah, but it takes
maybe
you
I
into
should
places
do
rather
something
more
just
sensitive.
a little different.
Exactly.
Yeah. John, our time is up.
Our time is up. I've had a lovely time. Thank you for having me on.
You are so much fun.
Thank you.
You are so coming back. So,
that's good to hear.
Yeah. So anyway, well, the music's going to come up here in a second. Your website or your book, Apocalypse Now, in the bookstores, Amazon.
Yeah, all the usual places. Go hit your favorite full service bookstore. Apocalypse Not. Everything you know about the Rapture, Nostradamus, the 2012 Nostradamus and the Rapture is wrong. Nice little non-committal subtitle there. But yeah, Apocalypse Not, and it should be a lot of fun. I enjoyed writing it. I understand from hearing from readers, a lot of people enjoyed reading it. There's the music.
There's the music.
End of the world, end of the show.
End of the show. End of the world in a few months. Anyway. Just kidding. Anyway, bye, John. And
bye.
We'll talk again soon.
Sounds like a great plan.
That's John Michael Greer. His book, Apocalypse Not. His webpage, one more time, is the Archdruid Report .blogspot.com. And next week, if I can get to the page, we're going to be speaking to Dominic DeLucia about the Hollow Earth theory, and my good friend Jerry Pippin of jerrypippin.com about Al-Qaeda to UFOs. So until next week, I'm Dr. Rita Louise. Be blessed.
Join host Dr. Rita Louise each week at this time for Just Energy Radio. Point your browser to www.justenergyradio.com.